There's something about the people you attract that reveals more about your inner world than you've ever realized. And this revelation might be exactly what you need to break the patterns that have been holding you back. Think about the last few people you've been genuinely attracted to, not just physically but emotionally drawn to in a way that felt almost magnetic. What did they have in common? Not the obvious things like appearance or profession, but the deeper patterns in how they approached relationships, how they handled conflict, how available they were emotionally. Most people assume attraction is random, that we fall for people based on chemistry or shared interests. But attraction operates much deeper than conscious preferences. You're not just attracted to people who seem appealing on the surface. You're attracted to people who activate something specific within your psychological makeup, something that was formed long before you ever thought about dating. The people you're drawn to are responding to signals you're sending out that you're probably not even aware you're sending. These signals aren't intentional. They're emanating from your personality patterns, your emotional habits, your unresolved experiences, and your beliefs about what love should feel like. And here's what makes this both fascinating and potentially disturbing. The type of person you attract most easily usually matches your current emotional state. If you're anxious, you'll tend to attract people who either amplify that anxiety or who are so detached that they make it worse. If you're afraid of abandonment, you'll find yourself consistently drawn to people who are emotionally unavailable. If you have low self-worth, you'll attract people who either treat you poorly or who are so insecure themselves that the relationship becomes a competition. This isn't bad luck. It's psychological magnetism operating exactly as it's designed to. Your mind is constantly scanning for people who feel familiar, and familiar doesn't mean healthy or good for you. Familiar means psychologically recognizable based on your earliest experiences of love and attachment. The person you're with right now represents something about your inner landscape that you might not have considered before. They're not just someone you happen to meet and fall for. They're someone your psyche recognized as matching a template you've been carrying around about what love is supposed to feel like. And if your relationships feel repetitive, if you keep attracting the same type of person with different faces, if you find yourself wondering why you can't seem to find someone who's actually good for you, the answer isn't out there in the dating pool. The answer is in understanding what you're unconsciously broadcasting that keeps drawing the same type of person into your life. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, spent decades studying hidden patterns in human relationships and made a discovery that most people still don't understand. He observed that we don't randomly fall in love with people who happen to cross our path. We attract and are attracted to people who mirror our unconscious psychological state, our unresolved conflicts, and our deepest beliefs about ourselves. Jung called this psychological projection, but it goes far deeper than simply seeing our own traits in others. According to Jung's observations, the people you attract most easily are those who represent aspects of your shadow self, the parts of your personality that you've either suppressed, denied, or haven't fully integrated. This means that your romantic attractions are rarely about the other person's objective qualities. They're about how that person's energy, behavior patterns, and emotional availability match something within your own psychological framework. If you grew up in an environment where love was conditional, unpredictable, or came with emotional chaos, your unconscious mind learned to associate those feelings with love itself. So as an adult, you'll find yourself naturally drawn to people who recreate those familiar dynamics, even if your conscious mind knows they're not healthy for you. Jung discovered that this process happens completely outside of conscious awareness. You might think you're choosing partners based on attraction, shared values, or compatibility, but your unconscious mind is running a much more complex process based on psychological familiarity. The person who makes your heart race might be activating the same patterns that were formed during your earliest experiences of attachment. The person who feels meant to be might simply be triggering psychological patterns that your brain recognizes as home, regardless of whether that home was actually safe or nurturing. This is why you can meet someone who is objectively good for you, kind, stable, emotionally available, genuinely interested in your well-being, and feel absolutely nothing. And why you can meet someone who is clearly problematic, unavailable, inconsistent, triggering all your insecurities, and feel an overwhelming sense of chemistry and connection. Jung understood that what we call chemistry is often just psychological recognition. Your unconscious mind meeting someone whose emotional patterns match your internal template for what love is supposed to feel like. But here's where Jung's insight becomes truly powerful. Once you understand this process, you can begin to change it. Instead of being unconsciously controlled by these patterns, you can start to consciously recognize them. You can begin to see the difference between what feels familiar and what is actually healthy. Jung believed that becoming conscious of these unconscious processes was one of the most important steps in psychological development. Because the love you attract doesn't just reveal your relationship patterns, it reveals your entire approach to vulnerability, trust, self-worth, and emotional safety. Here's something most people don't realize about their deepest fears. They don't just influence how you behave in relationships, they actively shape who you attract into your life. Your fears operate like magnets, drawing in precisely the types of people and situations that will activate those fears. If your deepest fear is abandonment, you'll consistently find yourself attracted to people who struggle with commitment, who keep one foot out the door, or who send mixed signals about their availability. If your core fear is not being good enough, you'll attract people who are critical, hard to please, or who make you feel like you're constantly auditioning for their approval. If you're terrified of being controlled, you'll find yourself drawn to people who are possessive, demanding, or who try to reshape you into their ideal partner. This isn't cosmic irony or terrible luck. It's your psyche's way of trying to resolve unfinished emotional business by recreating the conditions that originally created your fear. Your unconscious mind believes that if it can recreate the original wound in a new relationship, maybe this time you can heal it, or prove that you're strong enough to handle it. But what actually happens is that you end up in relationships that confirm your worst fears about love and your own worthiness. The person who fears abandonment gets abandoned. The person who fears not being good enough gets criticized. The person who fears losing themselves gets controlled. And instead of healing the original wound, these experiences create new layers of proof that your fears were justified all along. This creates a feedback loop where your fears become self-fulfilling prophecies. You attract what you fear most, which confirms that your fears are valid, which makes you more likely to attract the same type of person again. Think about your own relationship history for a moment. What's the thing you're most afraid of experiencing in love? Now look at your past relationships and notice how many times that exact thing happened. The person you were most afraid would leave you probably did. The person you were most worried wouldn't accept you probably ended up being critical or rejecting. This pattern isn't about attracting bad people or having poor judgment. It's about how your fear-based energy attracts people who are operating from complementary patterns. Someone who struggles with commitment is naturally drawn to someone whose abandonment fears make them fight harder to keep the relationship together. Someone who is critical and hard to please is attracted to someone whose self-worth issues make them willing to work overtime for approval. These aren't conscious choices on either side. They're unconscious matches where each person's wounds and fears create a perfect storm of dysfunction that feels familiar and therefore right to both parties. The most disturbing part of this dynamic is that the relationships that trigger your deepest fears often feel the most intense, the most passionate, the most meant to be. Because fear and excitement activate the same responses in your body. So you end up confusing intensity with intimacy, drama with passion, and activation with genuine connection. Every person you've ever been in a relationship with has functioned as a mirror, reflecting back aspects of yourself that you might not have been able to see otherwise. But most people miss these reflections entirely because they're too focused on trying to change their partner or wondering why their partner can't be different. If you consistently attract partners who are emotionally unavailable, the mirror is showing you something about your own relationship with emotional availability. Maybe you're attracted to unavailable people because some part of you is also unavailable, just in a different way. Maybe you choose partners who can't fully commit because you're not ready for full commitment either, but it's easier to blame them for the distance. If you keep attracting partners who are critical or demanding, the mirror might be showing you how critical you are of yourself, or how you've learned to equate love with having to earn approval. If your relationships always end up being about you trying to fix or save your partner, the mirror is reflecting your need to feel needed, your discomfort with accepting love without having to work for it. The reflection works both ways. The things that most annoy or trigger you about your partners are often the same qualities you possess but have disowned or refused to acknowledge in yourself. The partner who is too needy might be reflecting your own neediness that you've learned to suppress. The partner who is too selfish might be showing you the selfishness you're afraid to own. The partner who doesn't communicate might be mirroring your own difficulty with honest, vulnerable communication. This doesn't mean every relationship problem is your fault or that you should blame yourself for your partner's behavior. It means that the people you attract and the dynamics you create together are revealing patterns that exist within you. The most powerful example of this mirror effect is how your partners treat you. If you consistently attract people who don't value you, who take you for granted, or who treat you as an option rather than a priority, the mirror is showing you how you treat yourself. People can only treat you poorly if some part of you believes you deserve poor treatment. They can only make you feel not enough if you already have a core belief that you're not enough. This isn't about blame or shame, it's about recognition. The external relationship is showing you the internal relationship you have with yourself. If you want to attract partners who cherish you, the mirror is asking, do you cherish yourself? If you want partners who are emotionally available and committed, the mirror is asking, are you emotionally available and committed to yourself? The relationship mirror also shows you your growth edges, the areas where you're ready to evolve. Often the qualities you most admire in your partners are qualities you're trying to develop in yourself. Understanding this mirror effect changes everything about how you approach relationships because you stop trying to find someone to complete you and start using relationships as opportunities to understand yourself. There are patterns running in your unconscious mind right now that are determining who you're attracted to, how you behave in relationships, and what kind of love you allow into your life. These patterns were formed so early that you probably don't even remember their origins, but they're operating with precision, executing the same programs over and over again. Most people think they have conscious control over their romantic choices, but the truth is that your unconscious patterns are making the major decisions, while your conscious mind comes up with rational explanations after the fact. You might think you chose your current partner because they're funny, smart, or attractive, but your unconscious mind chose them because they match a template that was created during your earliest experiences of attachment and emotional connection. This template includes not just positive associations, but also the conditions under which you learned to expect love, the price you learned you had to pay for affection, and the emotional dynamics that feel normal. If love in your early environment came with anxiety, drama, or unpredictability, your unconscious template might equate those feelings with passion and excitement. If love in your early environment was conditional on performance or good behavior, your unconscious template might seek out relationships where you have to earn affection through constant effort. If love in your early environment was accompanied by criticism, control, or emotional volatility, your unconscious template might feel most at home with partners who recreate those dynamics. These patterns operate completely below conscious awareness. You don't wake up thinking, I want to find someone who will recreate the emotional dysfunction of my childhood. Instead, you just find yourself consistently drawn to people who happen to trigger the same responses that were activated in your earliest relationships. The unconscious pattern might be, love equals chaos, so I'm most attracted to people who create emotional chaos. Or, love requires sacrifice, so I'm drawn to people who need me to sacrifice my own needs for theirs. Or, love is dangerous, so I choose people who confirm that it's not safe to be fully vulnerable. These patterns are so deeply embedded that they feel like preferences, like your type, like what you're naturally attracted to. But they're actually unconscious recreations of your earliest emotional environment, whether that environment was healthy or not. Your unconscious love language was written by your earliest experiences of what it meant to be loved, valued, and cared for. Some people's unconscious love language is intensity equals care. Others is distance equals safety. Your adult relationships are unconsciously seeking people who speak the same language, even if that language includes patterns that are ultimately harmful. Breaking these unconscious patterns requires first becoming conscious of them. You have to start noticing the themes that repeat across your relationships. Do you consistently choose people who are emotionally unavailable and then spend the relationship trying to get them to open up? Do you find yourself drawn to people who need fixing and then feel frustrated when they don't want to be fixed? These patterns aren't random, and they're not about bad luck with dating. They're your unconscious mind executing programs that were written years ago. There's a disturbing truth about human psychology that most people refuse to acknowledge. We often choose partners who we unconsciously know will hurt us in familiar ways. This isn't masochism or self-sabotage in the obvious sense. It's your psyche's attempt to create opportunities for healing by placing you in situations that activate your deepest wounds. The problem is that without conscious awareness of this process, you end up repeating the same painful patterns instead of healing them. If you were emotionally neglected as a child, you'll find yourself drawn to partners who are emotionally unavailable, giving you endless opportunities to experience the familiar pain of not being seen or valued. If you experienced unpredictable love that was sometimes warm and sometimes cold, you'll attract partners who blow hot and cold, recreating the same emotional roller coaster. If you learned that love came with a price, that you had to be perfect or suppress parts of yourself to be loved, you'll choose partners who make you feel like you're never quite good enough as you are. Your unconscious mind believes that if it can just recreate the original painful dynamic with enough precision, maybe this time you'll be able to master it or prove that you're worthy of better treatment. But what actually happens is that you end up in relationships that confirm your worst beliefs about yourself and love. The person who chooses emotionally unavailable partners gets more evidence that they're not worth choosing. The person who chooses unpredictable partners gets more proof that love is dangerous and unreliable. This creates a prison where your relationship choices become the very evidence that validates your deepest fears and insecurities. The most painful part of this dynamic is that you can often see clearly what your friends should do about their obviously problematic relationships, but you're blind to your own patterns. You can recognize that your friend is dating someone who treats them poorly, but you can't see that your own partner's quirks are actually forms of emotional unavailability. This blindness exists because your wounded parts are driving the bus when it comes to attraction and partner selection. The part of you that was hurt is the part that's making decisions about who feels right, who creates the familiar emotional climate that feels like home. And that part of you doesn't want healing. It wants vindication. It wants to prove that the original hurt was justified, that you really aren't worthy of better treatment, that love really is dangerous and unpredictable. So it seeks out partners who will confirm these beliefs, partners who will hurt you in ways that feel familiar and therefore satisfying, even though they're ultimately destructive. The people who hurt you aren't random. They're precisely calibrated to activate your specific vulnerabilities, to push exactly the buttons that were installed during your earliest experiences of pain and disappointment. This is why the relationships that hurt you most often feel the most intense, the most fated, the most impossible to walk away from. Because they're not just relationships, they're recreations of your original wounds, and your wounded parts recognize them as opportunities for vindication. But once you understand that your attraction to people who hurt you is driven by wounded parts of yourself seeking familiar pain, you can start making different choices. The problem is that without conscious awareness of this process, you end up repeating the same painful patterns instead of healing Block 6, why you choose who hurts you. There's a disturbing truth about human psychology that most people refuse to acknowledge. We often choose partners who we unconsciously know will hurt us in familiar ways. This isn't masochism or self-sabotage in the obvious sense. It's your psyche's attempt to create opportunities for healing by placing you in situations that activate your deepest wounds, giving you chances to respond differently than you did in the past. The problem is that without conscious awareness of this process, you end up repeating the same painful patterns instead of healing them. If you were emotionally neglected as a child, you'll find yourself drawn to partners who are emotionally unavailable, giving you endless opportunities to experience the familiar pain of not being seen or valued. If you experienced unpredictable love that was sometimes warm and sometimes cold, you'll attract partners who blow hot and cold, recreating the same emotional roller coaster that taught you to associate anxiety with love. If you learned that love came with a price, that you had to be perfect, achieve certain things, or suppress parts of yourself to be loved, you'll choose partners who make you feel like you're never quite good enough as you are. Your unconscious mind believes that if it can just recreate the original painful dynamic with enough precision, maybe this time you'll be able to master it, control it, or prove that you're worthy of better treatment. But what actually happens is that you end up in relationships that confirm your worst beliefs about yourself and love. The person who chooses emotionally unavailable partners gets more evidence that they're not worth choosing. The person who chooses unpredictable partners gets more proof that love is dangerous and unreliable. The person who chooses critical partners gets more confirmation that they're not good enough as they are. This creates a psychological prison where your relationship choices become the very evidence that validates your deepest fears and insecurities. The most painful part of this dynamic is that you can often see clearly what your friends should do about their obviously problematic relationships, but you're blind to your own patterns. You can recognize that your friend is dating someone who treats them poorly, but you can't see that your own partner's quirks are actually forms of emotional unavailability or manipulation. You can see that your friend keeps choosing the same type of person over and over again, but your choices feel unique and justified each time. This blindness exists because your wounded parts are driving the bus when it comes to attraction and partner selection. The part of you that was hurt is the part that's making decisions about who feels right, who creates the familiar emotional climate that your nervous system recognizes as home. And that part of you doesn't want healing. It wants vindication. It wants to prove that the original hurt was justified, that you really aren't worthy of better treatment, that love really is dangerous and unpredictable. So it seeks out partners who will confirm these beliefs, partners who will hurt you in ways that feel familiar and therefore psychologically satisfying, even though they're ultimately destructive. The people who hurt you aren't random. They're precisely calibrated to activate your specific vulnerabilities, to push exactly the buttons that were installed during your earliest experiences of pain and disappointment. This is why the relationships that hurt you most often feel the most intense, the most fated, the most impossible to walk away from. Because they're not just relationships, they're psychological replications of your original wounds, and your wounded parts recognize them as opportunities for vindication or revenge. But here's what changes everything about this dynamic. Once you understand that your attraction to people who hurt you is driven by wounded parts of yourself seeking familiar pain, you can start making different choices. You can begin to recognize when you're being drawn to someone for the wrong reasons, not because they're good for you, but because they feel familiar to your wounds. You can start to distinguish between the magnetic pull of psychological recognition and the quieter, steadier pull of genuine compatibility and care. And most importantly, you can begin to heal the original wounds that are driving these choices so that your healthy parts can start making decisions about love instead of your wounded parts. But first, you need to understand what happens when you encounter the kind of love that would actually be good for you. Here's something that might shock you. You've probably rejected or felt unmoved by exactly the kind of love that would actually be good for you. The person who was genuinely interested in your well-being, who communicated clearly, who was emotionally available and consistent, you probably felt nothing for them. Or worse, you found them boring, too eager, not challenging enough, or lacking in chemistry. This reveals something profound about your relationship with love itself. If healthy love feels foreign, uncomfortable, or unexciting to you, it's showing you that your internal template for love is based on dysfunction, drama, or emotional unavailability. When someone treats you with genuine care, respect, and consistency, your wounded parts don't recognize it as love because it doesn't match the patterns that were imprinted during your formative experiences. The person who texts back promptly, who shows up when they say they will, who doesn't play games, they might feel too available because your system has learned to associate uncertainty with excitement. The person who accepts you as you are, who doesn't try to fix or change you, who values your opinions, they might feel boring because your programming equates love with having to work for approval. The person who is emotionally stable, who doesn't create drama, who can discuss problems calmly, they might feel like there's no spark because your system has learned to interpret emotional volatility as passion. This rejection of healthy love is one of the most tragic ways that early wounds continue to impact your adult life. You end up pushing away the very people who could offer you the security, peace, and genuine care that your wounded parts are actually longing for. But because healthy love doesn't feel familiar, it doesn't register as real love to your unconscious mind. Instead, it feels like friendship, like settling, like something's missing. What's missing is the familiar pattern of anxiety, uncertainty, and emotional activation that you've learned to associate with romantic love. The person who would actually be good for you doesn't trigger your trauma responses, doesn't activate your fears, doesn't make you feel like you're on an emotional roller coaster. And if your template for love is based on those experiences, their presence feels flat, unstimulating. This is why people often say they want healthy relationships but then feel bored or restless when they actually encounter them. Healthy love operates at a different frequency. It's steadier, calmer, more predictable in its care and availability. It doesn't create the dramatic highs and lows that your wounded parts have learned to interpret as evidence of passionate love. Learning to recognize and receive healthy love requires expanding your understanding of what love feels like. It means developing the capacity to appreciate consistency over intensity, peace over passion, and security over excitement. The people you reject often reveal just as much about your patterns as the people you choose. Understanding how the love you attract reveals who you are is only the first step. The real work begins when you decide to consciously transform the patterns that have been unconsciously running your romantic life. This transformation isn't about willpower or simply deciding to make better choices. It's about doing the deeper work of healing the wounds and updating the beliefs that have been driving your attractions and relationship patterns. The first step is developing pattern recognition, the ability to see your unconscious programs while they're operating rather than only noticing them in hindsight. This means paying attention to your immediate gut reactions when you meet new people. Notice who you feel instantly drawn to and ask yourself what specifically you find attractive about them. Is it their confidence or is it their emotional unavailability that you're interpreting as confidence? Is it their passion or is it their intensity and unpredictability that feels familiar? Is it their independence or is it their inability to be truly intimate that appeals to your own fear of vulnerability? Start questioning the stories you tell yourself about why certain people are attractive to you. Often, the surface explanations, they're funny, they're intelligent, are covering up deeper attractions that are based on unconscious patterns rather than conscious preferences. The second step is learning to recognize the difference between activation and genuine compatibility. Activation feels urgent, obsessive, like you can't stop thinking about the person. It often comes with anxiety, uncertainty about where you stand, and a compulsive need to win their approval. Genuine compatibility feels calmer, more natural, like you can be yourself without performing. It includes mutual interest, easy communication, and a sense of being appreciated for who you actually are. Learning to prefer compatibility over activation requires conscious choice-making over time, not dramatic revelations or sudden changes. Every time you choose to engage with someone who treats you well, instead of someone who triggers your familiar patterns, you're strengthening new pathways. Every time you notice yourself being drawn to someone for the wrong reasons and consciously step back, you're weakening the old patterns. The third step is doing the inner work to heal the original wounds that created your dysfunctional patterns. This might mean working with a therapist to process childhood experiences that shaped your template for love. It might mean learning to give yourself the care and validation that you didn't receive consistently in your early relationships. It might mean developing a healthier relationship with yourself so that you're not seeking partners to fill voids that only self-love can actually fill. The most important part of this inner work is learning to recognize your own worth, independent of external validation. When you know your own value, you stop being attracted to people who can't see it. When you're comfortable with your own company, you stop being drawn to people who create drama because you need the stimulation. As you do this work, you'll notice that your attractions begin to shift. People who would have been irresistible to you before start to feel less appealing. People who would have felt boring before start to seem more interesting and attractive. When the love you attract starts reflecting the healed, conscious, self-aware person you're becoming, you'll know the work is taking hold. The love you attract will always be a mirror, but as you grow and heal, what that mirror reflects back to you will change dramatically. Instead of reflecting your wounds, fears, and unconscious patterns, it will begin to reflect your capacity for genuine intimacy, your growing self-awareness, and your expanding ability to both give and receive healthy love. This shift doesn't happen overnight, and it's not always linear. You might find yourself occasionally falling back into old patterns, being temporarily attracted to people who represent your previous state, or feeling confused when healthy people don't immediately trigger the familiar butterflies of anxious attraction. But if you stay committed to your growth and healing, you'll start to notice fundamental changes in who catches your attention and who sustains your interest over time. People who are emotionally available will start to feel more appealing than people who are mysterious or hard to read. Consistency will start to feel more attractive than intensity. Someone's ability to communicate directly about their feelings will become more magnetic than their ability to create dramatic emotional highs and lows. These shifts in your attractions are evidence that your internal landscape is changing. You're learning to recognize safety and stability as attractive rather than boring. Your templates are updating to reflect your new understanding of what healthy love actually looks like. When you reach this stage of development, the love you attract becomes a source of validation for the work you've done on yourself rather than a mirror of your unhealed wounds. The people who are drawn to you will be responding to your authenticity, your emotional stability, your capacity for genuine intimacy, and your ability to love without losing yourself. The relationships you create will be based on conscious choice rather than unconscious compulsion. Instead of being driven by patterns you don't understand, you'll be making decisions about love from a place of clarity about who you are and what you actually need to thrive. This doesn't mean your relationships will be perfect or without challenges. It means the challenges will be the normal, workable difficulties that come with two whole people learning to build a life together, rather than the dramatic dysfunction that comes from two wounded people trying to heal through each other. The love you attract at this stage will reflect your capacity to be genuinely vulnerable without being needy, to be independent without being avoidant, to be caring without being codependent. It will show you that you've learned to love yourself enough to accept nothing less than treatment that honors your worth. Most importantly, it will prove that you've broken the cycle of unconscious attraction and learned to choose love consciously. Understanding that the love you attract reveals who you are isn't meant to make you self-conscious about your romantic choices. It's meant to empower you with the awareness that you have more control over your love life than you might have realized. By working on yourself, healing your wounds, updating your beliefs, developing emotional intelligence, and learning to value yourself appropriately, you can literally change the type of person you attract. We're not stuck with the patterns we inherited or the wounds we sustained. We can heal, grow, and evolve, and our relationships will reflect that evolution every step of the way. If this video helped you understand something about your own relationship patterns, hit the like button so it can reach others who might need this perspective. Share it with someone who's been struggling to understand why they keep attracting the same type of person. And let me know in the comments, what did the love you've attracted reveal about you that you're now ready to change? Thanks for watching, and remember, your next relationship is an opportunity to show yourself how much you've grown.